if you are constantly living in the future as an individual, doesn't matter if you're a leader, doesn't matter if you're a worker, be a husband, a wife, whatever area of life that you're in, if I'm constantly living in the future, it creates anxiety. And the
Hmm.
reason it creates anxiety is because at some level you can have the strongest vision ever, but there's some unknown associated with it. And unknown casts anxiety.
So, folks, thank you for joining the Executive Exhale podcast today. I'm super, super thrilled to introduce Mike Phillips. Mike Phillips is a powerhouse in leadership education and coaching. Woo woo. Yes, welcome to the show. And the voice behind the Leadership Toolkit, a must listen podcast for professionals looking to elevate their leadership skills. Based in Colorado Springs, Mike brings over 30 years of experience in leadership and coaching, paired with 2 decades in sales and marketing, making him a dynamic educator, podcast host, YouTuber, and consultant. With specialties spanning leadership, business management, facilities management, public speaking, and call center operations, he's known for guiding individuals and teams to exceptional business success. He's achieved some top honors as a motivational speaker, 3 times in the Best of the Springs, and his podcast ranks in the top 3% globally, which is an amazing accomplishment. A recipient of the 2019 Community Leadership Award, he has also been consistently recognized as the top 50 automotive marketer by Google and previously served as a board chair for the National Institute for Social Impact. An ordained Christian minister and a proud father of 3, Mike is supported by his incredible wife, who stands by him every step of the way. And, so happy to have you here. Join us as we dive into his wealth of expertise and experience and insights. Welcome to the show, Mike. So happy to have you here.
Tammy, absolutely. Thank you so much for inviting me. I'm excited. I mean, we have this friendship that we've known each
Yeah.
other for some time, and I'm stoked that you're doing this and we get to have this conversation.
Yeah, for sure. You've had a really incredible journey through these 30 some odd years of leadership and management and all the things that you've done. So maybe so folks can get to kind of know you a little bit, what sort of sparked your interest in leadership development? Sort of what brought you on this path, this journey that you're on right now?
Yeah, absolutely. So for me, it started as a youth hockey coach. I was a teenager. I volunteered and said, "Hey, this looks fun. I can play hockey," and I had an opportunity. The whole when I started, I was actually an inline hockey coach, and the bonus was that I got to go skating for free. So it was like, yeah, let's do that.
Yeah.
And then over time, I got licensed as a USA Hockey referee and coach, and uh, got involved in youth hockey programs and started to see that the impact that one person could have from that individual level to some of these kids. And it was amazing. I still to this day, the one thing or one story, one of them that is most impactful to me, I had some parents come to me. I had a young man that was playing hockey for me. He was 7th grade, I think, and he was just struggling on his grades.
Mm.
And his parents came in and they said, "Oh man, we just can't get through to him. Coach, can you have a conversation? For whatever reason, he's going to have to repeat the 7th grade." And they were so agitated. And this kid was just a phenomenal athlete, great young kid, good at athletics, good influence, kind person. And I'm
Hmm.
like, how can this kid be struggling in school? Like, I wouldn't have made the connection had they not said something. Because you have this perception of where he's at, where he's there. And so I had a conversation with him. I said, "Hey, you got to focus on your schoolwork. If you ever want to get ahead in life, you got to be able to be consistent and do this." And we had probably a fairly adult conversation for him at the time. Fast forward, probably, I don't know, 30 days. The parents come back and they're like, "Oh my gosh, his grades have completely turned around. What did you say to him?" And I'm like, "I just told him to do his homework." And they're like,
He
they're
just
like,
needed a
wait
little
a
coaching.
wait a minute. We've said that, and so it sort of made me realize that sometimes that different voice from
Mm.
a person, when you're influencing someone at an individual level and then at a team level. Well, fast forward, I ended up, managing a roller rink early on, and so that sort of extroverted and influence on people was something that always was exciting to me and fed my soul. Fast
Mhm.
forward, got into automotive sales and marketing in the early 2000s. Been in that for 20 plus years. And then sort of over time, as I've developed some of my skills and just built team. I mean, you build teams on the ground. I think one of the things that's important is you have to have performance as a leader. You can't just say,
Right.
well, hey, I got my manager title, and so people are going to come and seek me out. What happened sometimes by accident was I had high performing teams. They were producing, within our store, or then I was engaging with other companies. People came in and said, "Hey, how did you do this?" And we're engaging with them. And just over time, uh, I've continued to and then develop that portion of having influence with others. And then, secondly, I've been very deliberate and fascinated by the skill and the art of leadership and influence on other people, which bridges the gap in management as well.
Yeah.
So I guess that's the 2 minute elevator pitch,
Yeah. No, that's
or five
I
minute.
mean, amazing story about the power of coaching, though, as well with
Hmm.
with the young boy, because leadership often is, it's not just about direction and making sure people are on target. It's not about that necessarily, or sticking to strategic vision. It's often, a lot of times, it's about coaching people and getting them on board with things, right? So that's an awesome example of that in
Hmm.
this child. Yeah. Um, One of the things, as you know, this is a wellness channel, and some of the things that I see in my clients are things like, um, and just for context, for if this is the first time you're on this podcast for some
Sure.
reason, I coach executives. That's who I coach. That's my avatar group, who are struggling with either performance or wellness or stress and that kind of thing. And one of the things I find with them is that they struggle with boundaries and prioritization. Those sort of like the the big things, right?
So
Because,
much.
and they're the hardest things to manage. So I'm just curious around how you've enabled people or led through situations where, when everything is a priority, nothing is, everything's urgent, but nothing really is, because everything is. So how do you tease out what's most important? How do you guide leaders around this notion of boundaries and priorities? I'm curious.
Well, for me, there's a couple of things. Number one, going back to and I'll move into this question, but one of the things that occurred to me as you're talking about, coaching and coaching this young hockey player, is the first thing that it takes is you actually genuinely have to care about the
Right.
person. It's not about their success. I mean, he could have told me, pound sand, coach, I hate doing homework, and not done it. But you have to have a meaningful conversation in a way that they know you care. Fast forward 20, 30 years into leadership, I think that's just still as applicable. So you're saying, hey, where do you decide uh, what is most important?
Mhm.
For me, I think one, it comes through caring about people enough to have a conversation with them, to then um, actually listen.
Mhm.
Sometimes it's listening between the lines, if that
Yeah.
makes sense. I don't know a better way to put that, but listening to the context behind the words that they're using. And so when you do that, it helps determine in one venue, like, what's important to them, right?
Mm.
Because if you find those two things: one, I care about you as a person, I care about your success, I care about your well-being. And then two, I've listened to you so I can actually understand that, not just so I can respond to it and so forth. I think in coaching someone, that'll help you define direction with them. Now, if you're asking from the perspective of me, well, how do I decide what's most important? I think that also comes through listening. I think it takes, um, I mean, first and foremost, inside you, like as a leader, what is it that is important? What's your moral compass? What's that
Mm.
guiding light? Because I
Right.
think we have that ability to know, here's the direction that I need to be headed. And then if you're having those genuine conversations with people, you have to be willing to listen to the feedback, because somebody may look at you, Tammy, and say, hey, uh, coach or leader or manager or boss, you might not do that because it's a trap.
Right.
And if you're so stuck on, yeah, but that's the direction we're headed, you're not going to see some success, or as much as you maybe would. If you're willing to listen to that, then I do think as a leader, because you're saying, how do you coach people through it? How do you decide what's most important? I think at some point, the direction you're headed, and there's so many different tentacles that question could have, but you got to put a stake in the ground then and pick a direction. I think decision making is powerful. You're saying, well, how do you decide? I think that's such a broad question,
Right.
because you got to take in all of these pieces. Well, for example, if we're talking about business, like what's the project at hand? If we're talking about company growth, that's a little bit different than a project. Like, what's the direction that the company is headed? If we're talking about individuals, what's the skill that I want to learn, or the direction that I want to go in life, or what's this thing that I want to acquire? But then I think once you've done some research and some listening, then you put a stake in the ground and you pick a direction and you go. If you realize that that direction is not the right one, then you have to be humble enough to bruise your ego
Right.
and uh, maybe discuss a new tack, discuss a new path. It's I've shared on my podcast before. Like, if I'm for us, I'm in Colorado, right? So Pikes Peak is a big deal for us. And if we were to say, oh, hey, we're going to go hike up Pikes Peak, there's a hiking trail, and we can go hike up Gold Camp Road. Well, you have that starting point, you have that base camp, and the goal is the top of the mountain. The path to get there may not look the same for everybody, but once you pick that direction, you start working your way up the path, and you start going, and you start making progress. Well, the reality is, here in Colorado, we get all four seasons every day. We may make it a quarter of the way up that path, and all of a sudden we're hit with winter,
Right.
and the thing, the approach may change, but the
Right.
goal doesn't change. We still got to get to the top. And part of that comes from being able to listen and prepare and get all set up at base cap, because we would have that discussion. Hey, there could be all these four seasons that are approaching. What are the things that we're taking up the mountain with us, so we can be sure to get to the top no matter what it is that is coming at us? Hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds to me, if I'm reflecting back, it sounds to me that what you're really getting at is that it's really important to have everybody, leader and team, understand what the goal is, what the vision is, and as long as
Oh,
you have that in
100%.
your sights, then the prioritization exercise becomes a little less difficult because you know that you have to make it up that mountain.
100%. And I think, being that I know the goal, I think, of your podcast too. One of the things that I think is fantastic, and on my show we talk about vision all the time. What's the vision? Right? We got to cast the vision. We got to talk about the vision. We got to live, breathe, eat the vision, and so forth. One of the things that people never talk about, Tammy, is the fact that when the leader is constantly living in the vision, you're constantly living in the future, that can create an unnecessary stress,
100%.
because you are constantly out in this forefront, you're constantly out in this place. And
Mhm.
I've shared this before. Like, if you are constantly living in the future as an individual, doesn't matter if you're a leader, doesn't matter if you're a worker, be a husband, a wife, whatever area of life that you're in, if I'm constantly living in the future, it creates anxiety. And the
Mhm.
reason it creates anxiety is because at some level you can have the strongest vision ever, but there's some unknown associated with it. And unknown casts anxiety. And so I think that's one of the things that you coach executives through, is the fact that it's like, yeah, it's important to live in the future. It's important to cast vision,
Yeah.
but at some point you got to come back down to core, back down to your source, and be in the present for a minute so that you can reconnect with yourself, reconnect with the people in your life, reconnect with the God, or spirit, whatever your thing may be.
Yep.
And and it's the same way. You have people that are constantly living and dwelling in the past, looking back, going, well, look at this thing that I did, this is awesome, let me tell you about the thing. And they lose sight of two things. One, they lose sight of the vision. And secondly, if you're constantly living in the past, then
Mhm.
that's what creates depression.
Yep.
Right? Because there's the thing that I did, but there's also the thing that I didn't do, and I didn't accomplish this. And so it's the same thing. You got to stretch people into, either pull them back or pull them forward from time to time. And I think that's probably one of the things that you do so brilliantly, is you pull them into this present state to say, well, look at where you're really at. And I think that's one of the things that helps leaders move forward, executives move forward, is when you look at where you're really at and you assess it and you listen to people that are in your life and you take that influence, then that allows you to start casting vision again and moving back forward. um, for me, that's sort of the definition, I guess, of, two steps forward, one step back. Sometimes you got to take that step back, reassess,
Yeah.
because you're still going to make two more steps forward.
Yeah, it's an interesting balance that you're talking about between high performance and wellness.
Mhm.
And not just for yourself, but for your team, right? Because if you're like you said, if you're constantly driving and I mean, I've had leaders do this as well as an employee in the past
Sure.
or senior leadership who are constantly driving to that next step. And you're like, but can we just breathe and enjoy the one we're at? Can we just enjoy and like appreciate where we're at right now? And so I love that perspective. So so then how have you balanced that high performance? You've talked about sort of being present. What does
Mhm.
that mean? Because that to me, that's mindfulness to me, right? That's all about being in the present moment. So what are some things that you've done to keep yourself in that present moment? What are some tactics you've used?
You know, the the first thing is you have to first experience and live in a complete state of overwhelm, overcommitment, over
Right.
everything, because that's the thing that's painful. I mean,
Yeah.
yeah, you and I have had conversations in between. I think I've messaged you once or twice over the years and been like, "Oh my gosh, I got so much stuff going on." And one of the first things is when you realize that as a leader, as an individual, as like I said, a husband in life, a business person,
Mhm.
whatever role it is that you're feeling that overwhelm in, uh, and this may be counterintuitive to some, but you have to realize that you've said yes to too much stuff and start saying no. Like you have to overwhelm is created because of all of these things that we're allowing to bombard us. Like, okay, I said yes to this project and I said yes to coaching this person and I said yes to consulting with this company. And I said yes to this. Well, then I said, here's the smaller thing, and this may seem insignificant, but I said yes to opening my Facebook and engaging with the stupidity today. I said
Right.
yes to this other piece of social media. I said yes to, I got to set up the podcast. So we've got all these yeses that we say yes to, and then we realize at some point, and this is what's happened to me, is all of a sudden inadvertently, uh, God, the universe, our lives start saying no, and all of a sudden then you don't have time for the person in your life that you committed to say, yeah, through thick and thin we'll stay together. You don't have time for those three wonderful kids, and this is from my own experience,
Yeah.
that we want to give them the world, but we are busy having our own world crash down on us, and so you can't, you're giving them a broken world because all they have is that outside child, and your family's looking in and going, oh man, we're thinking, gosh, look at me, I'm such a hard worker and I've got all this stuff done. And they're like, man, I just wish dad would sit down and watch a movie. And
Yeah.
so, um, for me, it's that core of, first you got to realize the overwhelm. You got to start saying no. And then I think it's really important to prioritize. For me, when I have had people ask me, well, what's the most important thing in your life? I can tell you immediately in order. Number one for me is God. I always stay focused on God, the stories in the Bible, the morality. That's my number one. And number two for me is my wife, my kids, my family, right?
Right.
And then everything else stems from there. Well, if that's the commitment as a professional, how much time am I making for those things that I say are my priorities?
Right.
And so I got to come back to that source and what's most important. Of okay, well, if that's what I say is most important, I had someone say this to me years ago, and it seems cliche. It's one of those things. I had a friend say to me, yeah, everything's cliche until it's not, right? Until you realize there's that truth behind it. That, we work to live. We're not supposed to live to work. And I think people that are leaders, executives, high performing people, at some stage of your life, you are going to live to work. And you have to you have to have enough mindfulness, enough of being in the present, enough connecting with yourself to realize, well, there's more than this. And I will tell you one of the turning points for me, Tammy, because I was in that point, like I high performing, was doing stuff at the dealership, crushing it on YouTube, crushing it on the podcast,
Mhm.
constantly doing stuff, was taking vacation with my family, like high points, but all my energy was constantly spent on something other than myself.
Right.
And at one point, and you'll remember this in 2021, I got that, God hand that said, okay, you got to slow down. And I got COVID very bad. Both of my lungs collapsed, and it forced me to be very, I mean, when both of your lungs collapsed and I'm sitting in the hospital, and please, I don't want anyone to take this out of context. So this isn't my identity, but it's a realization that I had to slow down, and there was only one thing that was important, two things that were important at that point. One, stay focused on God, pray every day, and focus on breathing and recovery. Because if I
Right.
wasn't here, I couldn't have all that influence and impact and all this stuff. So sometimes that's an outside force that says, "Hey, buddy, slow down."
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah, I mean, whether you come from a highly sort of spiritual world or not, the reality is that the forces will shut you down. Your body will
hmm
shut down. Like it's just um sort of a natural stress response that at some point things just don't work the way you want them to, and you have to start second guessing. That experience, I'm sure, was scary as all get out.
yeah.
Having been a nurse in a hospital setting and understanding what respiratory diseases can do to people, it can be very scary for people. What did you learn about yourself from a resilience perspective, or about your personal well-being going forward from that experience?
I learned a lot. I just considering, as far as resilience, I think that for anybody, when we are put in situations, whatever the situation may be, you always have a choice.
Hmm.
Whatever that choice may be, you always have a choice. And for me, it was like, hey, I'm not. This is not my time. I'm not ready. We're gonna move forward out of this. And when you realize that choice, once you make that choice, you got to fight tooth and nail for it. One of the other things that I realized, oftentimes as executives, as leaders, high level managers and so forth, we start to think to ourselves, well, that somehow we get this illusion, and I'm going to call it an illusion, that we're more important than we are, that we're that pinpoint, we're that guiding light.
Yeah.
And here's the other realization. For me, it was like, okay, I have to take care of myself. I have to fight through this. I got to keep doing this stuff because it was important to me and my family. But on the outside stuff, all the other things, I'm still just one dude and I'm replaceable.
Right.
And that can hurt some feelings because we think, oh man, yeah, but I worked up here and gosh, this person. So it does not matter what level you're at in an organization. It doesn't.
Yeah.
You bring value every day. You bring yourself every day. You bring the most. And what are the things that I can contribute to others? Like contribution is one of the most powerful things that you can offer, and as a leader, as a coach, as a business person.
Hmm.
But the reality is, if you're removed from that role, someone else can fill that role very, very easily.
Yeah.
And so it's very important to take care of yourself. And you know, based on I said just a moment ago, like we've got that choice, that decision to make. When you're making those choices, make sure that they're the right ones for you know not just the company, not just the other people, but you do have to make sure that they're the right decisions for you and your well-being and your family. I mean, there's a fine line, there's a balance in there that I think it's really easy. I was actually going to go down a path here, Tammy, for a second.
Okay.
I was visiting and coaching with a young man that works with me the other day, and one of the things that we were talking about, you sort of have these three circles, and when they're perfectly, you got the spiritual circle in your life, you got the business circle in your life, you got the personal circle. You could do spiritual, financial, personal, however you break that down. And when you're in this perfect place, you've got the three circles sort of intersected, and there's that perfect point in the middle where they all touch. Well, the problem is we start pouring certain energy into one place or another. If you pour, and speaking with anything, we pour too much into that spiritual realm, and well, all I'm going to do is focus on my spirit and my faith, and that circle grows, but the other circles shrink. And so often, and I don't necessarily agree with this philosophy, but you end up that it's like, well, hey, I'm spiritually filled, but financially I'm broken and I can't help anyone. Broke people can't help broke people, right? And the same thing is it, you know if you are too focused on family and fun and that personal circle, then you get so focused on that and watching movies and traveling and so forth, you lose sight of the spiritual. You also lose the financial to be able to do those things. Or just like we were talking earlier, you throw yourself into your work, right? I live to work, and I got this
Yeah.
great work presence and this leadership aura, and my finances and my business are just crushing it, but then you have no relationship with your family or with God.
Mhm.
And so as we were talking through that, it's like there's this balancing act to make sure that each of those circles gets filled. Each of
Right.
those glasses gets filled. And I think one of the things is it takes a real self-awareness. It takes some
Mhm.
introspective, that I got to step back sometimes. And a lot of times I think that can occur for us as individuals, uh, but also a lot of times it comes from other people in our lives. Like you and I have been friends for some time,
Yep.
and it would be one of those things that if you reached out to me and said, "Hey, Mike, I think you're being a bonehead, and there's this thing happening,"
Right.
that carries weight.
Right.
When you have people that kind of know who you are and know how you carry yourself, and if you have one person doing it, maybe it's because they're headed a different direction in their life. But if you
Yeah.
have two or three people saying something to you, take note, and that should carry some weight for you to say, well, let me take a step back and see what I can see from a different perspective.
Yeah, I love the perspective of looking at the trends as opposed to those outliers. Obviously, if you have an
Mhm.
outlier situation, then you can choose to ignore it or choose to listen to it. It's really up to you. And some
Sure.
people will listen to it because their inner critics take over. And it's like maybe they're right, maybe I'm a complete idiot. Or alternatively, it's like, no, it's just their opinion. Whatever. I just keep moving forward. But I love the notion of paying attention to those trends. Like if you're hearing
Mhm.
3, 4, 5, 6 people tell you, hey, like we're seeing this thing, either in your leadership or in your personal life, then I feel like people have to listen. But I think the challenge with leadership and leaders who are very high performing is the ego gets in the way, right? The ego gets in
Mhm.
the way because it's like, well, as you said earlier, I'm the pin that holds everything together. But the reality is that when I retired because of my burnout, I left early and decided to completely change my career. I was replaced within 30 days. Nothing I did was so damn important that they couldn't replace me. And I
Mhm.
mean, I mean, highly functional, very performant executive with health, public health, emergency management, all the things they needed for the role, and yet I was replaced. So I'm with you on this, and it's funny because how many people I've seen in my emergency department when I started my career as a nurse who came in, and I have two things I used to say to people all the time about people who come into the emergency room dying. I've never seen a dying atheist. I know, I don't want to offend the atheist out there, but I've never seen you. I'm sorry. When everybody's looking for something on their last deathbed day, I'm telling you, I've yet to see that. And the second thing is that nobody, and I mean nobody, says I should have spent more time at the office. And it sounds like a trite thing to say, but I actually have been at the bedside of
Mhm.
hundreds of people dying in my career, and none of them said that. Almost everyone to a T said, I wish I had taken more risks. I wish I had taken that trip. I wish I wouldn't have waited to retirement to live my life. I wish I had spent more time with my family. I wish I had reached out to my brother that I haven't talked to in 30 years, and I wish I should have mended that way. We should never have gone
Mhm.
30 years without talking. Like it's the stuff about our humanity that comes forward, right? When we're thinking about those regrets at end of days. And I have a friend of mine who always used to say, I refuse to live in regret. Everything she decides is based on personal fulfillment, drive, intuitive sense. She refuses to live in regret. I thought, wow, that's like phew, inspiring, right? Um,
Absolutely.
just crazy, crazy stuff that you also shared with me that you're on a weight loss journey, which we don't have to go into the tactics of that, but I am curious about because I am too. By the way, I've been back at the gym for a few months now, trying to release the weight. I don't like to call it weight loss. It's you're not losing something; you're releasing what no longer serves you. That's just me.
Sure.
But for me, it's about health and being here a longer time because you mentioned earlier if I don't have the financial abundance required, I cannot serve, right? It's kind of the same thing in the work that I do.
Sure.
If I'm forced to go back to a 9 to 5, I'm not doing what I'm actually here to do. What God, universe, creator calls me to do. I won't be able to do that if I'm in a 9 to 5. And I know that in order for me to do what I'm doing now, I have to also take care of my personal body, my vessel, if you will, has to be taken
Yep.
care of. That's the last vestige for me. So tell me a little bit about that and how you're managing those mental and emotional things that sometimes come up for us when we're in these release patterns.
I don't know how deep we want to go into this. So
As deep
my
as you want.
okay, so as I mentioned before, my background in hockey, I was playing hockey 3 to 5 days a week. I was coaching, I was refereeing, so I was on skates
Right.
all the time. I would at that time too, I was also in the gym 3 days a week, all the time, very health conscious, very that was just one of those pieces that you lived.
Mhm.
Then I got out of the rink business and out of doing hockey all the time and moved into automotive sales. Still was very conscious 3, 4, 5 days a week. Um, and that waned over time.
Mhm.
And you realize it's like anything, over the course of 5, 8, 10 years, you don't realize it's like boiling the frog, right? All of a sudden you look and go, how the hell did I end up with this 30 extra pounds, right? Well, it's a couple pounds this
Yeah.
year, 5 pounds next, not
Mhm.
exactly eating right. Hey, I can still do this as I'm getting older. Instead of going to the gym 5 days a week, three will suffice. Plus, I like cake. And you end up in this place. Well, fast forward for myself, we'd actually gotten, my wife and I together had really gotten into uh, being more health conscious. I was back in
Mm.
the gym 4 or 5 days a week. Her and I were going together. We had a good friend that was a personal trainer in 2021. And so I was in a better place. I think I was between 220 and 230. Then I got sick. And for me, I, initially when I got out, I was like, oh, got to get back in. And when I got sick, I dropped down as low as I think about 214. I lost, quite a bit of weight being ill. And then you're sitting in a hospital bed and so on and so forth.
Mhm.
The end of 2021, then I got out and I thought I was going to go back immediately. My doctor, however, was like, hey, I don't think you realized what you've been through. I'm like, shut up, I got this. But I had outside people that kept telling me, well, you were really in bad shape and you this. And I don't know if it was truly a physical um, constraint or it was a physical manifestation because people kept telling me what bad shape I was in. But within 3 or 4 months of being through that, I really, started to struggle to breathe more, was starting to struggle to work out. And so for the next about 2 years, probably 2.5 years, 2022 to well, June of this year, I really didn't do much, and it was just my mind. I allowed myself to say, well, gosh, I was in really bad shape, and so that was the justification, right?
Gotcha.
So long story short, I ended up I peaked at 276 pounds, and I'm like, oh my gosh, right? And it's one of those things that I just looked, and it's like I said earlier, you have a decision, you have a choice in everything. And part of the justification was, well, I'm too fat to work out. I can't breathe, so I can't work out. I don't have somebody to go with now, so I can't work out, because my wife she's got her sort of own workout regimen now. She's actually in really better shape. And then I could get mad at her to go, well, you wouldn't go do this with me and you wouldn't go work out with me. And so it's your fault I'm fat. And so you have like this. I'm just saying, like I said, I don't know how deep you want to go in this, but I had all of these reasons justifying in my brain. Now, mind you, I got a lot of other good stuff going on, like my
Right.
podcast is going and rocking and all this, but that one area in my life I had allowed to slip. And when it came up, I was like, man, I should really work out. Well, but I got this to do at work. Well, I should work out, but yeah, I have a tough time breathing. And so it was finally when I tipped the scales then in like June or July, it was July of this year. I was like, okay, I'm done. I'm just done
Yeah.
being fat. I hate the way I look. I hate the way I feel. If I was struggling to breathe before, I'm struggling to breathe now. And for myself, it took 2 years to get to that point of complete, like, complacent misery. I don't know what you would call it, but that thing for me. And I mean, for anybody, it could be weight, it could be anxiety, it could be depression, it could be there's all kinds of other things. For me, weight was that low area, that low point in my life that I was justifying with other areas. But I was like, well, but everything else is going good. Well, I don't have time because the podcast is going good. And so,
Mhm.
well, that's okay. Well, you only see from here up on the podcast, and
Yeah.
the
Yep.
beard looks pretty good. So, yeah, so
And then they see us in person and go, "Oh, okay."
whoa, yeah. And I don't know that there was a person or thing. It was really, it was within myself. I was just like,
Yeah.
I'm done. And
Yeah.
and I saw one of my buddies, I kept getting his notifications on my phone that, oh, he worked out again on your stupid Apple Watch. And I'm like, okay. So I literally just started walking. That's all I did, because I was like, okay, if I can do anything, I can walk. And so it was a deliberate decision that while I'm working, no matter what, at least twice a day for 15 to 20 minutes, I'm just going to stop. 15 to 20 minutes will not stop the world for anybody. The email
Mhm.
is still going to be there. The phone call is still going to be there. Everybody can find 15 or 20 minutes. So I was just like, okay, I'm going to go start recording it. And so I walk now a minimum of a mile a day. I'm down 18 pounds in 3 months, but that's literally just walking. So when you're talking about a weight loss journey or a weight release journey, I think the first thing it comes with is whatever that vice is in your life. It's the decision, okay, and then I'm going to do this thing differently, because you can always find 15 or 20 minutes. And then following that, once I started to see a little bit, it was like, oh, I'm down 3 pounds. That's okay. I started to feel accomplished. It's just like achieving that goal at work. It was like 3 pounds, woohoo! and
Yeah.
and the biggest thing too is I think you need to find the right people when you're trying to overcome something in your life. That's the cheerleader. So like I tell my wife the 3 pounds, and she's like, high five, right? Everybody else would be like, who cares? But
That's the Mel Robbins,
she's
the high five, the magic of the high five book that she wrote.
yeah.
Is like, you got to celebrate your wins.
Well, and that's the thing is
Yeah.
you need other people to celebrate the wins with you, but they're not going to celebrate if you don't tell them about it. So you have to be humble enough, bruise your ego enough, Tammy, to tell them, "Hey, I did this stupid little thing that," and don't call it stupid, but that's you're going to say that at the beginning. I did this thing,
Yeah.
and celebrate the win. And then I started to look and said, okay, well, what's the thing that's killing it? Sugar, right? I like cake. I brought up cake earlier. I'm a fan. But it's like anything in moderation, right? And so when you're talking about the weight loss journey, that the first thing is you got to, like, we all see it. Like if it comes to weight, it's easy to see. It's easy for
Mhm.
ourselves to say, but you have to, first it's acceptance, then you got to make that decision of
Mhm.
and it doesn't matter how small. It
Yeah.
does not matter how small that thing is. For me, it was 15, 20 minutes. And the irony is when people, I'd be out walking around the building, I had a couple people that are like, hey, what are you doing? Like, I'm walking. And it was like so absurd because everybody else is in the office doing their thing. And it's, and nobody was saying it out of like um, malice or making fun. It was just like, it's confusing to people. When you start to change something, they're like,
Yeah.
what's going on? And you have to have that sort of fervent belief that, well, I'm just doing this thing. Why? Because it's good for me. And so that's, I'm continuing. I'm in the 250s now. So
Good.
my goal is to get down to 220, because weight and high blood pressure and stuff, that's a
Yeah.
killer too.
Yep.
Add some stress to that, pepper in some stress, and it's
Yep.
you know
Nothing like cortisol to make us pack on the
oh
pounds. I noticed that from burnout. I gained like 40 pounds in 2 years just from the stress, from
yeah.
stress eating and from the cortisol, not sleeping, etcetera. A couple of things I wanna pull out of that before we start to wrap up is
Yeah.
the notion of making the decision, having a strong why, it makes you feel better, it's good for you, you wanna live longer, you wanna have impact, all those things, and then figuring out the how and then implementing. To be fair, whether it's exercise, your performance at work, it's all the same stuff, right? Figure
Mhm.
out what it is you wanna do, what's the goal, how are you gonna get there, why do you wanna get there? It's the same questions, and then celebrate the wins. And what I wanna say on top of that from a wellness perspective is, and I do this with leaders now, is habit stack. So if you are already walking your dog in the morning, for example, you can do a mindfulness walk. Like, you can actually meditate while you're walking your dog. Like, there's things
Mhm.
you can do to sort of amplify the experience if you're willing to habit stack, which is great. So,
Incantations. I
yeah,
do that while I walk.
incantations, prayer, whatever works for you.
Mhm.
If you're out there walking anyways, like, spend those 15 and 20 minutes. I have a thing that I do where I hit the I am, I feel, I know, I experience, like, I'm using all of the different
Mhm.
directions of all the different chakras, if you will, kind of trying to not indoctrinate so much, but reprogram a little bit of the negative space in my head, and this is just something I do when I'm walking or when I'm outside grounding. So habit stacking is a huge tip for folks out there.
Well,
So yeah, go
can
ahead.
I jump in on that? We
Yeah,
were
yeah.
talking beforehand, like there's enough negative crap in the world,
Oh, of
right?
course.
So
Yeah.
social media, politics, all this other stuff going on. At least, and I think you're so spot on. I mean, I could share mine. I sit and say the stuff over and over again. There's two things I'll do. Three things. Often when I'm walking, I will pray, right? I have a conversation with God. And then usually my second lap when I'm doing that, I'm just quiet because I
Hmm.
allow him to talk back. If I'm going to ask God for something, it's worth taking the time to be silent and listen,
Yeah.
right? So that's one. Two is I do say nice things to myself because sometimes there's so much going on in the world and there's enough not nice things being said that it's valuable to say nice things to your brain. And third, there are times that I'll just walk and I'll put on a podcast, an executive exhale podcast, a, a Eric Thomas, stuff that is motivational and stuff that's good and wholesome and growth oriented, and just listen,
Yeah.
15 or 20 minutes. And you don't have to do all three of those every time. You don't have to, you could do none of them. You could just be focused on the road ahead and be walking or running or whatever. But you're absolutely right. And I think that's so powerful to be deliberate in what it is that we're putting in.
Yeah, and I love the notion of really paying attention to the messages, whether you're God leaning and it's from God Himself, or whether it's from your intuitive self, whatever you believe in. The reality is that when you're silent, and there's such magic in what you said there, when you ask a question of yourself or of your creator, whatever you believe in, you need to be quiet and listen. Like, you need to actually be quiet and listen. Don't
Yeah.
just keep talking and scrolling and doing all the things. Like, take a moment to just sit and think. And people go, "Well, how do they talk to us? Or how do I hear my intuition? Or how do I hear God?" It's like, it's in the thoughts that come to you. It's in the feelings you feel. It's you're the first thing that comes to mind is usually the right answer, is what I tell people, right? So just trust it, and you'll know what your next steps are. So tell us what projects or tools you're currently working on that you'd like to share with the audience.
Uh, my biggest project, my biggest uh, passion right now is really my podcast. Also, I
Mhm.
do the Leadership Toolkit podcast, and I do that because I'm passionate about broadcasting and sharing not just my voice but other people's stories and hearing how other leaders and executives, we talk about people's wins. You've been on my show. We talk about losses
Yeah.
and how can that affect or infect other people. Like, that's one of the things I'm most passionate about right now, is just having that message get out. I work in digital marketing in the automotive space, and so that's a constant daily growth, trying to beat the algorithm and learn stuff there. I'm really deliberate in learning something every day. And then probably within the next year, I'll give myself a year. Well, I have three other projects. One is I'm sort of getting back onto the speaking circuit, as people are saying, hey, we want a leadership message or a leadership lesson. I'm getting back into that speaking circuit, which I've been out of since the COVID era. Most everything we've transitioned online and doing that stuff.
Mhm.
Secondly, I have a leadership uh, manual or leadership book. I don't know what you would call it, but it's called Leadership Elite, and that stands for something. And it's basically a leadership manual that I've compiled both from my experiences as well as conversations with others. And then I'm in the process of writing my second devotional. I wrote a devotional in 2021. It was released literally the month I got hospitalized,
Oh,
and
wow.
then and it's a 30-day devotional. It's called 30 Days of Bible Verses, Volume 1. And so it was literally meant to be, that 1 minute, uh 2 minutes daily that I spend with God. And it's a very just direct and straightforward message. And so I'm working on a second one of those. I have a good friend that passed away 1 year ago this month.
Mm.
And so I have a dedication in there to him, because just he was a light and an influence with people. And what's crazy is he was one of the people that championed. You question yourself. You start to author something, you start to write something. Even with my background in faith, I was like, oh, I'm going to release this devotional, and in my mind it's going to be awesome. And then you start to question yourself, and it you got to realize when you're doing a project like that, there is a greater message. There's more impact that's meant to be made. There's like, I'm bringing his message to the world, him, God's message to the world through me. I'm allowed to be a mouthpiece. And so he was somebody, my friend Quentin was someone that had, though our beliefs didn't always align on that, he was such a champion. It was one of those, he's like, yeah, man, you got to check this out and do that. So I'm working on that by the end of the year, then my leadership book, and then also doing some more speaking, and tune into the leadership toolkit. That's my shameless plug.
And I'm going to put your YouTube on the banner here. And then there's also a LinkedIn link for you as well. I'm going to put all of the links to reach out to Mike if any of this resonates with you and you want to work or connect with Mike in some way. All of the links will be in the show notes. I am just super happy that you got to join me today.
I am too. Tammy, you are just an amazing person. You're a light. I love what you're doing with yourself, your business, the podcast, and bringing these sort of messages out. So I'm really honored to be here. I appreciate you, and I thank you for the invitation.
Oh, no problem at all. For those that are out there, thanks again for listening to the Executive Exhale podcast. Remember to just stay connected, stay connected to your intuition, and never forget to just exhale.